Iran's 27 reform groups have forcefully demanded urgent reform and put forward a roadmap of 11 measures covering various aspects such as politics, economy, military, diplomacy, and people's livelihood. This comes after former Iranian President Rouhani published an article in the media a few days ago calling for reform, representing another voice for reform within Iran. Previously, the outside world generally believed that the current Iranian President Pezeshkian and his government were the stronghold of the reformists. However, it now seems that the voice for reform within Iran has long spread across all industries and fields. These 27 reform groups stated in their joint statement that the 12-day war with Israel has exacerbated inflation, industrial stagnation, currency collapse, and capital flight, creating a risk of more severe economic paralysis than ever before. Iran has reached a critical moment where reform is necessary. The background for the 27 reform groups to voice their demands is that Iran's GDP growth rate has been below 1% for 3 consecutive years, reaching the lowest level in nearly 40 years. The currency has been continuously depreciating, and the exchange rate of the rial has dropped below 42,000 to the US dollar, which has exacerbated inflation and significantly increased prices. Moreover, the economic downturn has resulted in a youth unemployment rate of over 30%. The reform groups emphasize that, as an oil-producing country, Qatar had a per capita GDP of $76,000 in 2024, the United Arab Emirates had $49,000, and Saudi Arabia, another regional power, had $35,000, while Iran only had $4,770. The Iranian people are urgently eager to know the reason. It should be said that this question is not easy to answer. If we attribute it to U.S. sanctions, doesn't that exactly mean Iran is in urgent need of improving relations with the U.S.? If not, it would indicate that Iran's internal problems are severe, and reform is equally imperative. In short, by citing economic data to make their case, the reform groups have indeed hit the conservatives' Achilles heel. Beyond economic issues, the reformists have also turned their sights on the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the conservatives' stronghold. The IRGC holds an extremely special position in Iran, operating as a self-contained system across political, economic, and military spheres. It is not subject to the oversight of the Iranian government. Instead, it reports directly to the supreme leader, functioning almost like a state within a state. Politically, the IRGC enjoys special privileges. In terms of equipment and military funding, it takes priority over the regular armed forces and maintains a complete internal system for intelligence, command, and combat operations. What draws the most criticism, however, is that the IRGC also controls massive economic entities and wields significant influence in key sectors such as oil, natural gas, infrastructure, and telecommunications. Saudi Arabia's Middle East newspaper has revealed that the IRGC controls 57% of Iran's imports and 30% of its exports. Some analyses suggest that through hundreds of affiliated holding companies and trade institutions, the IRGC controls approximately 30% of Iran's total GDP. With one hand gripping the purse strings and the other holding the gun, the IRGC, having amassed enormous economic interests, has long ceased to be a mere military force. Once an army engages in business, the consequences are endless, and the most direct manifestation is the loss of courage and combat effectiveness. Since Soleimani integrated Shia resistance forces in the Middle East and established the Resistance Fox, the IRGC has provided substantial financial and weapons assistance to organizations such as Hamas, Hezbollah, the Assad government of Syria, and the Houthi armed forces every year. However, when these organizations came under deadly attacks from Israel, neither Iran nor the IRGC took any meaningful action. Years of investment were wasted for nothing. During the 12-day war with Israel in June, the IRGC's performance was also lackluster. The air defense system, built with huge sums of money, proved completely ineffective. Just 3 days after the war broke out, the Israeli Air Force had seized air superiority over Tehran. All these failures have sparked dissatisfaction and doubts from the reform groups. Yet the reform groups have no real say. Their internal demands, stripping the IRGC of its political and economic privileges, and external calls, improving relations with the United States, have both crossed the conservatives' red lines. Tasnim News Agency, a media outlet under the IRGC. specifically published a commentary harshly denouncing the reform groups as capitulationists, even directly comparing Rouhani to Mikhail Gorbachev, the former president of the Soviet Union, and criticizing the reformists for only leading the country to ruin. Faced with the escalating conflict, Supreme Leader Khamenei, who had been out of the public eye for a long time, was forced to speak out. In his speech, Khamenei criticized those advocating negotiations with the United States for thinking too simplistically and only seeing the surface of things. He emphasized that the U.S. does not aim to coexist with Iran on an equal footing, but to force Iran into submission. Regarding the ideological dispute between reformists and conservatives, Khamenei concluded, "The enemies know they cannot subjugate the Iranian people and the Iranian state through war, therefore, they are attempting to achieve this goal by sowing divisions within Iran." Khamenei's remarks have essentially elevated this ideological dispute to a level akin to a color revolution. It is easy to imagine that this has snuffed out the reformists' last glimmer of hope. Khamenei's stance is hardly difficult to understand. As supreme leader, he must safeguard the rule and interests of the clerical establishment. In fact, from my perspective as a third party, I also find these reformists utterly incomprehensible, being bullied yet still showing signs of submission. Such people are either malicious, foolish, or funded by hostile forces. Since the outbreak of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, one of the core ideological foundations of the clerical establishment has been unwavering opposition to the U.S. and the West. Khamenei would naturally never shoot himself in the foot by abandoning this principle. Additionally, the reform group's decision to target the IRGC is overly hasty. The ties between the IRGC and Khamenei run extremely deep. It was Khamenei who personally organized and established the IRGC in the first place, and he even served as its first commander. Before ascending to the position of supreme leader, Khamenei held only the rank of a mid-level cleric in terms of religious status, a position that, by tradition, disqualified him from becoming supreme leader. However, at the time, Khamenei, who was serving as Iran's president, leveraged his control over the government and the military, specifically the IRGC, to ultimately stand out in the power struggle and seize the highest authority. Therefore, at critical moments, Khamenei will undoubtedly go to great lengths to protect the IRGC. This is not only because the IRGC helped him rise to power in the past, but also because the IRGC remains his most powerful pillar for maintaining supreme authority to this day.